All right, let's count the Omer together, starting with the Al Sfirata Omer blessing. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kishanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu Al Sfirat HaOmer. Yesterday was the fourth day of the Omer. So, Hayom Chamisha Yamim LaOmer. Today is the fifth day of the Omer. Now we're going to say our La'asok B'divrei Torah blessing together. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kishanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. I also got confused. This may happen again. Praise to you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy with your commandments and command us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. All right. Gabriel, would you please read our Miriam on 1 foot text for us?
Sure. Miriam on 1 foot. Miriam was Moses' sister, a leader and musician who was good at finding water. Some people put out a Miriam's cup with water alongside the Elijah's cup with wine at the seder due to the connection of Miriam with water.
Okay, thank you.
Are we still supposed to open the door for Miriam to come in and take a sip?
We do not. That is a good question.
She goes thirsty.
Maybe she goes thirsty. Maybe she's there the whole time with us. It's a newer custom. It hasn't been totally figured out. Some people have the custom of talking about Miriam at the point in the Seder when they are washing hands. And they refer to the hand washing cup as Miriam's well, which we'll come back to later. One of the points of this is to recognize that in a story that is largely focused on Moses and a Haggadah that is largely focused on male rabbis, that females were present and contributed as well to our ability to leave Egypt. So that is one of the points of this. And tonight we're going to look at several of the parts where Miriam in particular played a role in the Passover story, which is why we're doing that, or why we're doing this tonight as opposed to some other week. Hinda, would you please read our first act?
A certain member of the house of Levi went and took into his whole household as his wife a woman of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son. When she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile, while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moses, exclaiming, "I drew him out of the water." Context. This is from the biblical book of Exodus, introducing the origins of Moses. History and stories are not inevitable. People and storytellers make choices. At what point could this part of the story have turned out differently.
Thank you.
He could not have been a nice person and drowned him, or maidservants could have said, don't take him.
Hmm.
Didn't Pharaoh pass a law that Jewish husband and wives should not have an intimacy in order to prevent the birth of children?
Good question. Pharaoh passed a law saying that all male newborns were to be killed. I forget if they were to be drowned or not, but I can look that up quickly. There's a midrash that after that, Miriam's parents, Yocheved and Amram, decided that it was better not to have kids at all, or more kids. They already had Miriam and Aaron. And so Amram decided to divorce Yocheved, and then all the other Israelites followed his lead and they divorced their wives. And then Miriam said, Dad, you're being worse than Pharaoh, because Pharaoh said not to, that all the male babies should be thrown to the Nile. And you're saying that all babies in general shouldn't exist. So you're twice as bad as Pharaoh. And so then Amram went back and remarried his wife, and all the Israelites remarried their wives. And this midrash is put in place partly because of the juxtaposition that at the end of chapter 1, at the end of chapter 1, Pharaoh has told all the people, not just the midwives, that if there's a boy that's born thrown to the Nile and a girl that then live, and at the beginning of chapter 2, it says a certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman, which is what we have here in our text. This midrash also answers the question that if you look at the beginning of chapter 2, which is right in front of us, it appears that two people got married and then they had a kid. But by chapter 3, by verse 4, there's an older sister. So you're like, where did that kid come from? And so this midrash explains why they're getting married, even though they already have a daughter. So that is what that's how that midrash tries to answer that question.
And his son too.
Hmm?
And his son too. Aaron was 3 years
Right.
older than Moshe.
Yes, there's also a son, although he's not yet mentioned in the story, but we meet him later on.
But isn't that midrash a bit surprising, because once a man divorced a woman, he wasn't really free to remarry her, as I understand Jewish law.
No Torah yet.
But if you look at that, given that they were aunt and nephew as opposed to uncle and niece, which is a later law, I mean, there's that issue too.
This
Amram and
pre-
Yocheved.
presumably this predates the giving of the Torah, so whatever
Yes.
marriage laws would have been binding upon them, I would assume would have worked differently than how they do now for us. Since presumably they would just be operating by Noachide laws at this point for marriage halacha, I think. Would that be
Right.
correct?
Yes.
Related to that then, David, does that mean that for Noachides, they can like remarry the same person after they divorce them?
Oh,
So I'm not totally positive how Jewish law itself stands on this point. My understanding, and I will try to do some research on this, is that the rule is that if it's a woman, if a man divorces a woman
You have something for dinner, right?
and she marries a second
Do you
husband,
have something
and
for
the second
dinner later?
husband
You're on
divorces
mute,
her,
so,
then the first husband can't remarry her.
okay.
But I
I
think that
Okay.
that if they get divorced, they could get remarried
Hmm.
if neither of them is married to somebody else, certainly the woman. That being said, there's also the rule in the Talmud that Dina de Malchut to Dina, the law of the land is the law. So you also have to follow civil, in Jewish law, you have to follow the secular laws pertaining to these matters as well, however they're relevant.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. How might Miriam have felt when her mother was hiding her baby brother?
Do we know how old Miriam is?
No. But go ahead, pick an age, and then state that as your reference point, and other people can pick other ages. That's a good question.
She could have been scared
I mean-
that the Egyptians would come and find the baby and not only take the baby away, but also take the mother away for hiding him.
Hmm.
Did Pharaoh indicate or by what age the child had to be cast into the sea or into the Nile?
Pharaoh,
Birth.
yeah. Every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. And in fairness, Moses' mother did put him in the Nile. Throw might be a little bit of a stretch, but she did put him in the Nile.
Pharaoh didn't say not to use a basket.
That's true. It's like the egg drop challenge. And Lauren, answer to your question, or further answer to your question about how old Miriam is. While we don't know, she has a minimum age of being old enough to talk to Pharaoh's daughter and like make this offer.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, she can be a precocious kindergartner, like she could be that little.
Mhm.
Or she could be like middle, more like 8, 9, 10.
Yeah.
Part of how she feels though is predicated on how it worked out. That presumably there was enough, she knew what was happening. Moses wasn't the other baby going in the river. So that like this was a whole thing. So that's certainly trauma.
Mhm.
But because her brother was saved and the mom got, that sort of wrapped up into like, how'd she feel?
Right.
I would just sort of do it sort of collectively. It's depends where you want to, it's not great. The whole scene is terrible, but for the story, it worked out. Sort
Right.
of.
I mean, that's the thing about this is that at the point where I'm asking the question, how did she feel when her mother's putting her baby brother in the Nile? She doesn't know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen, but she doesn't. So that's always the challenge when looking at history, at stories,
Right.
to realize that the
Well-
people don't know how it's going to end up.
But it's not, she probably wasn't stationed there for days. I mean, this is a shorter period of time that if
Sure.
she stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him, it's unlikely this went on for days and just even river currents as they are and things. So there was, I mean, it only concerned that kind of thing. I don't think there's anything, unless there was some confidence between the basket and maybe there were other people along the Nile, that there was some hope in there that he'd be found by someone. Maybe
Yeah.
it wasn't necessarily the Pharaoh's daughter.
Yeah.
David,
Yeah.
I was reading in today in Sota 12. It was a daily dose of Talmud. They talk about Miriam the prophet,
Mm.
and she, I believe, is responsible for the birth of Moses because she got her father Amram to remarry his wife, because she argued that the decision that he made to divorce her was worse than what the Pharaoh had proclaimed, because it wouldn't just kill, the Pharaoh was going to kill every firstborn male, but by him not having relations with his wife, it would also preclude having any girls. So basically it would be the end of the Jewish people.
Yes, that is a midrash. It's not in the text.
No.
But you raise a good point that midrash uses a descriptor for Miriam that we'll see later on, where she's called Miriam Hanivia, Miriam the prophet.
Right, because she says that if they have a child, if Amram and Yosheved have a child, that he would live. So somehow
Right.
she knew that.
Right. That would be a midrash, taking the thread in the Torah of her being a prophet and pulling it further beyond what's in the text to make new tapestries.
Right.
Without the males, the girls would have no children of their own in the future. So there still would be an end to the Israelites.
Aha, you have discovered Pharaoh's devious plan.
But what I question is, why did Pharaoh's daughter defy Pharaoh's law?
Mhm.
It's a good question. I throw it to the group. What do you all think?
I'm sure Pharaoh wouldn't approve of that.
Because she had a good inclination, like all other human beings do inherently, and so she recognized that it would be better to be merciful rather than partake in the evil demands of I guess just the evil demands of someone who's above you in rank. I mean, even from our own laws, we would know, for example, in the case of, I believe, wills, like death wills, like if in a will, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, David, if your parent asks you basically to violate Jewish law somehow in a will, you can't do that. So
Mhm.
so similarly, even though there's that that relationship of parental authority over her, she still defies that command because she recognizes that the opposite is to do something evil. And at least I guess that's my little sub midrash, maybe, because I don't know exactly, but that's my interpretation.
Taking it one step further, why would Pharaoh allow this child to be raised in the palace? All of a sudden his daughter comes up with a baby. Where did the baby come from? Didn't he ever question that for his daughter? And if she told him it was a Hebrew's baby, would he ever have allowed it?
I sort of I sort of wonder if she couldn't have kids.
I don't
Like,
know.
I'm making this up, but my own thought about this, to what you're all saying exactly, like, how did, that, I mean, they also don't mention if she has a husband.
Hmm.
We don't know who her partner is or isn't. He is never mentioned if there is anybody. But I sort of wonder if like she couldn't have kids or didn't have kids and that this was sort of a nice compromise. I think less that it's because she was such a good person. I don't think she was an evil person, but sort of my fantasy reading this isn't because she sort of like knew better. It seemed like she sort of, I mean, she did take pity, what a beautiful boy he is, that kind of thing. This is possible. I just sort of wonder that. Like, I sort of feel like maybe she couldn't have children in the first place or something of that is what I end up thinking with this story. Kind of what you all are saying, like, like where's the husband? Is there one? How does the Pharaoh just accept this random kid suddenly who's 3 months old? Like, how does it all work? I'm thinking it was sort of like a win-win. Maybe she couldn't have any, and now she does, something like that.
I was watching Prince of Egypt with Shira yesterday, and there's a line that what you're saying makes me think of, where Pharaoh's daughter says to Moses, "The gods brought you to us, or brought you to me."
Mm-hmm.
That's what Barry just sent a note that basically said that the hand of God was in everything.
Yeah. So the Pharaoh's daughter may have seen the Egyptian gods at play here. That if she believed in those gods, that she could see it as, and here I'm just totally making up the world's newest midrash, that the Egyptian gods sent Moses to her. Could have been one of the ways that she looked at it, riffing off of what you're saying, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
And the Pharaoh could have not even known that kid was hers or was there, because there were probably all her handmaidens had all these kids, and there were probably, he was so busy being the Pharaoh, he didn't have time to even pay attention to what she was doing in all probability. She wasn't his only child. He probably had lots and lots and lots of kids.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other reasons I also had that speculation was just because I know that throughout the way this narrative kind of expands, we obviously have a more antagonistic relationship developing between even further from this, with like the actions that Moses has to do to free the Jewish people.
Mhm.
But I know that the text also attempts to humanize the Egyptian people regardless, and not have them just be presented as mere villains. That's why, like, for example, there is the law to basically not discriminate against an Egyptian. Am I recalling correctly?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so that was kind of the source of maybe some of my speculation regarding her motivation.
Mhm. Yeah, the other thing that I'm noticing right now per our discussion is that Moses disappears from the palace as a baby. Like he doesn't show up in the palace until he's weaned. So it's also a different explanation that Pharaoh's daughter is going to have to give as to like where this baby came from versus where this like 2-year-old came from, or something of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
So as you're constructing your mental movies of how this played out, something to think about. And then Barry posted a question in the chat. So what is Miriam doing now? Which I assume means like after she made the shidduch, made the match between Pharaoh's daughter and Moses' mother.
Mm-hmm.
So I throw it to you. What's Miriam's life like at this point?
Probably just growing up like a sister of Moses, as she would have if this all hadn't happened in the first place.
Hmm.
So you're saying that she's growing up
Typical girl.
as what?
As a typical girl.
A typical girl with Moses in the picture or without Moses in the picture, or either way.
Either way. Maybe she's helping care for Moses during that period.
I mean,
Yeah.
in that way, it might circle around to the Pharaoh's daughter being more humane, like maybe kind of even knowing that the woman nursing him was the mom, like, or that this might be a relative of the baby, you know, just because she was sort of right there.
Wow.
Hmm.
I think it's striking that there's no evidence that Miriam ever got married.
Mhm.
Huh.
Yeah. All right. There are more questions to think about, but let's go to Act 2 because we have 3 acts plus an epilogue to get through. Carol, would you read Act 2, please?
Sure. Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, picked up a hand drum, and all the women went out after her and danced with hand drums. And Miriam chanted for them, "Sing to Adonai, for God has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver God has hurled into the sea." Context. This is from the biblical book of Exodus, right after the Israelites have escaped through the splitting of the Sea of Reeds. And Moses had led some singing. This is the origin of the prayer Michamocha. The word for hand drum is often translated as timbrel, and it is also in Psalm 150. At what points could this part of the story have turned out differently?
It's the first time nobody has anything to say.
What would
David,
have happened if Nachshon never jumped into the river?
David,
Yeah.
Yes, typo.
isn't the Song of the Sea thought to be one of the oldest texts within the Bible?
It is. And Miriam's song is thought to be even older than the song that Moses was said to have led.
Oh, I meant Miriam's song. I said the wrong thing, but because then that changes a little, because if you have to make the rest of the story fit Miriam's song, that can strain, you know, when you're saying how could it come out differently, but it would still have to fit the older text if one's going to look at it from the history of the text point of view.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, if anybody can see what I have up as a virtual background, that's a timbrel that shows Miriam and the women singing and dancing.
Very nice. All right. Why might Miriam have a timbrel with her when she left Egypt?
One more time.
Why might Miriam have a timbrel with her when she left Egypt?
Oh.
Well, the Egyptians gave the Israelites whatever they wanted to leave. So why not?
Something important to her.
Might have had it all along, even before they decided to leave Egypt.
Mhm.
Yeah, she was a musical person. Octavio said, wasn't she a songwriter?
It's entirely possible.
Yeah.
She wrote this song.
Yeah.
Is it in this story another, doesn't God or someone tell them that they should stop chanting because the people died?
It is around this story. It's usually
Okay.
tied to the previous text with the song that Moses led. And there's a midrash, possibly also in the Talmud, but I'm pretty sure it's certainly in one of the classical midrashim, where
Mhm.
the angels are singing, and God tells the
Oh.
angels to stop singing because my
see.
creatures are drowning.
Okay,
So the people get to sing, but the angels don't.
okay. I just had some recollection of that. I didn't know where.
Yeah, no, you made a good connection.
I thought that was a much later midrash, but of course, I guess I'm wrong about that. That it was, from a time of kind of embarrassment over the, these horrific plagues visited and all these Egyptians who really weren't responsible morally, one might say, for all this suffering that they had to go through. But that sticks in my head. I don't know.
It's entirely possible that the midrash was composed later. I'm not sure which book of midrash it is in, but knowing which book would then help date it.
Mhm.
It's interesting that it says that Miriam in this text, and I guess in an earlier one, that Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, and I've read some things about that, but it doesn't call her the sister of Moses. And it's like,
Mhm.
Aaron was the big leader, maybe, and then Moses was this young fellow who came up out of nowhere, and or maybe was the daughter, maybe was the Pharaoh's daughter's son. It says she took him
Oh,
as her son, which is an interesting phrase. I don't know. I'm not trying to get into the maybe I am the in Porgy and Bess, the song. It ain't necessarily so. It just got through the sermon by the satiric parody of a sermon by the gambler, a Sport in Life, where he says she drew him, she says, from that stream. So there's always there's an interesting ambiguity in when you in that story.
Yeah.
Well, didn't
You're right. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Morris,
No.
go ahead.
Well, I think the reason that she was talked about as Aaron's sister is because Moses wasn't in the picture then. It wasn't until later that Moses was born. So that's
not
why.
here.
Pardon?
Yeah.
So anyway,
She's
that's all I want to say.
yeah. Here she's not. So this description of Miriam as Aaron's sister is after Moses has led the people out of Egypt. The previous time that Miriam appears, she's not named, as we saw, but she's described as the sister of Moses. And in between, God has told Moses to meet Aaron, his brother. So now we are connecting the triangle. All right, I'm going to pose another question. This is question number 5. Moses died at age 120 after 40 years in the wilderness. Thus, he was 80 or so at the crossing of the sea. Miriam was his older sister. How does it change things for you, knowing that she was older than 80 in this scene? And perhaps think about how old you thought she was, or you envisioned her as when you
She
first saw
was
her.
into her second childhood.
Maybe that she suffered more. Like if they're just crossing the sea now and she's like after 80, then there's been a whole life of sort of the brother taken and slavery and something like that.
Yeah.
Well, can we take their age as literal 120 and 80? I mean, because like Abraham, he left in his household when he was, to go out and look for God at, he was 75.
Mm-hmm.
And he lived to be also much older. So I just wonder is can you take that age to be the literal age of 120? Because I don't know how they counted. Do they count years or they count months, by the moon?
Oh,
I thought Miriam was older than Moses.
Yeah. And Moses is 80. So Morris, there are 2 ways of looking at your question. At least 2 ways. One is that there are those who read ages in the Bible literally, particularly after the flood. So before the flood, you've got people living 900 years and such, and after the flood, people go down to like just a little bit over 100. So some people read that as literal. Some people look at it as a nice round number, but not a literal number. If you're thinking about how they posed or how they measured years, it's entirely possible that they measured them as a set of 12 months, in which case you've got a difference of 11 days. So between a lunar year and a solar year. So if you take off 11 days for every year, then that's 11 times 120. So it's not exactly 120 solar years, but it's north of 110 at least, probably.
yeah.
So actually, the math might be the other way around. I take that back. He would be older than 120 in solar years. So then Miriam would be older than 80, as would Moses at this point.
I wouldn't worry too much about that because according to Rashi, looking back, citing the Mechilta, Moses' mother was 100 years old when he was born, taking her as a daughter of Levi, and I guess the reasoning is that a daughter of the actual son of Jacob, Levi. So because the other, and then she had lived all that time, and there she was again. So you make anything you want of it, but I wouldn't worry about any particular bit of it without taking the other bits into account. That's my reaction to that.
How old was Sarah when Isaac was born?
Yeah, pretty old.
Yeah.
But that's explicitly said, and here you have to infer it by doing the rabbinical arithmetic. They're pretty good at doing arithmetic.
Yes, they don't have Facebook to distract them.
Mhm.
All right, let's go into Act 3. Diane, would you read this, please?
All right, should I pick up like at number 3 or
Yeah,
start?
pick up at number 1.
No,
Okay.
number one.
Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had taken into his household as his wife. He took a Cushite woman? They said, has Adonai spoken only through Moses? Has God not spoken through us as well? Adonai heard it. Now Moses himself was very humble, more so than any other human being on earth. Suddenly Adonai called to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Come out, you 3, to the tent of meeting. So the 3 of them went out. Adonai came down in a pillar of a cloud, stopped at the entrance of the tent, and called out, Aaron and Miriam. The 2 of them came forward, and God said, hear these my words. When prophets of Adonai arise among you, I make myself known to them in a vision. I speak with them in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is trusted throughout my household. With him, I speak mouth to mouth, plainly and not in riddles. And he beholds the likeness of Adonai. How then did you not shrink from speaking against my servant Moses? Still incensed with them, Adonai departed. As the cloud withdrew from the tent, there was Miriam stricken with snow-white scales, the leprosy. When Aaron turned toward Miriam, he saw that she was stricken with scales, and Aaron said to Moses, oh my Lord, account not to us the sin which we committed in our folly. Let her not be like a stillbirth which emerges from its mother's womb. Oh God, pray heal her. But Adonai said to Moses, if her father spat in her face, would she not bear the shame for 7 days? Let her be shut out of camp for 7 days, and then let her be readmitted. So Miriam was shut out of camp 7 days, and the people did not march on until Miriam was readmitted. After that, the people set out from Hatzerot and encamped in the wilderness of Paran. A lot happened.
All right. So this is, so the rabbis look at this text and they notice that it comes after the elevation of the elders. 70 elders get promoted, and they imagine a discussion between Miriam and Zipporah where Miriam says how wonderful that that these elders have been promoted, and Zipporah says, yes, great for them, but not so great for their wives, because now they'll ignore their wives just like Moses ignores me, because he's too busy. And so then we have this in the text where Miriam and Aaron say Moses has a wife, a Cushite woman, which he's only referred to as marrying one person in the Torah. And has Adonai spoken only through Moses, has God not spoken through us as well? Meaning, in this interpretation, we can figure out how to balance community and family responsibilities. Why can't Moses? And so then Miriam gets punished with Sarat even though Aaron also spoke out against her, against Moses as well.
So
Possibly
why
because he
didn't
had
Aaron
ritual.
get? Why
So
didn't
this is
Aaron get as well?
Possibly because he had ritual responsibilities as the high priest. But yes. he
So
probably-
she was talking badly that he wasn't paying attention to his wife.
Mhm.
I thought it was because she didn't approve of a Cushite wife. That
Right.
wasn't the point.
So you can read it as that way. You can read it as he has a Cushite woman. Or
I thought that was the problem.
so that's the surface level issue. The rabbis ignore the fact that it says Cushite, and some of the rabbis ignore the fact that it says Cushite and more focus on the fact that it's that he has a wife. You can read this text in a variety of ways.
Okay.
Given the time, I'm going to point out the epilogue, and then those who want to stay and discuss further can do so, but I want to give people a chance to leave. So in Numbers 20, Miriam dies. Verse 1. Verse 2, there's no water.
There's what?
There's no water. Like right after it says that Miriam dies, the next thing it says is, and there was no water. And this leads to the situation where Moses hits the rock and doesn't get to go into the land of Israel. Possibly, among other reasons, stressed out over the death of his sister. Because of the juxtaposition of Miriam's death and the lack of water, the rabbis read this as Miriam was responsible for the water that the Israelites had, and when she died, then there was no water. The ancient rabbis read this as there was a miraculous well that followed the Israelites in her merit, and then when she died, the well dried up or disappeared. Modern scholars look at this and say Miriam was probably a gifted water finder, because in desert communities, some people have the skill of being able to find water where others can't see it, and perhaps Miriam had that skill. Either way, out of the 4 episodes that we see with Miriam, 3 of them have to do with water. Miriam at the river with her brother, Miriam singing at the sea, and Miriam dying, and then there being a lack of water. And this brings us full circle to the custom of Miriam's cup being filled with water, because Miriam is associated with water so much.